we got enough folks in the room to go ahead and get started here. This is an optional track for the hackathon. And this is something that the Bitcoin Design Foundation has allowed me to help out with. So we have a bit of an accessibility initiative within the Bitcoin Design Foundation. And my name is Jason Hester. I'm a senior accessibility engineer. Currently working as a consultant at Amazon. So I don't work directly in Bitcoin. But I can tell you that, dealing with Bitcoin wallets for the last 15 years, or 13 years, whatever it is, I can see that there's lots of accessibility issues in most of them. But this is an optional track, as I mentioned. We have some prizes that we're going to give out. You're going to get some bragging rights if you win the accessibility track. So there's a design track and an accessibility track. I brought a couple of BitX Gammas, so one of the teams will get a BitX Gamma, and then you'll also get tickets for next year. So that should help out with your costs. But this is really for projects that are going to be implementing some kind of front end or UI. So it's called Designing for the Edges, Accessibility Resources for Designers and Developers. So some of our workshop goals that we're going to cover today is we're going to try to understand how accessibility improves usability for everyone. We'll learn some common disability types and assistive technologies that people with disabilities use. We'll also explore basic methods to test your Bitcoin applications. And then we have a resource guide for the Designathon and Hackathon towards the end. So that's really going to be the meat of it, is just to kind of introduce you to this guide, let you know where the resources are, and hopefully you can utilize those during the Hackathon, or even if you don't utilize them during the Hackathon, if you find something interesting in there that is helpful for you in the future, that you use it and contribute to that guide if you find something that you would like to add as well. All right, so we kind of start off with this core heuristic, and this is something that I've held as a view for the last 15 years since I've been doing accessibility engineering, and it's catering to the extremes in human variation can and often does improve usability for the average user. Now, that requires a little bit of investigation. It is a heuristic, so it's kind of an assumption. But I can tell you that over the last 15 years, that has proven out for me, in my experience. A lot of times when we're designing for people with disabilities, we end up improving the design system for everyone, or the design for everybody. So this is also known as a curb cut effect. It's a key part of universal design and human factors. And then human factors is really relevant in high-stakes, irreversible systems like Bitcoin. Before I got into working in design and accessibility, I actually was in the Navy and worked on some critical systems there. So that was what really got me interested in human factors to begin with. So a little bit about the context with Bitcoin. So we want to avoid boating accidents in Bitcoin caused by poor UX. So if we have high friction, that generally equals high risk. If we have poor UX, it can make security and privacy completely unusable. One mistake can cost everything, and then who's left out today? We have older adults, people in the global south that might have unstable internet connections or might be utilizing older cell phones and older technologies, and then people with disabilities who are using assistive technologies. So I think we want to take the lead from Signal, right? Signal's done a really good job at creating a good UX that has allowed people to adopt encryption standards in their communications. Before that, we had other systems that were much more cumbersome and harder to use, and those got much less adoption. So just thinking about it in that context, we want to create the best UX to enable people to utilize the best practices for privacy, security, and all the things that we think are important in Bitcoin. So why else does this matter for Bitcoin? So there's some key aspects of an inclusive Bitcoin design. One, accessibility helps make Bitcoin usable for all. It benefits everyone, including individuals with disabilities, and it's a fundamental aspect of universal design. Accessibility also helps prevent irreversible errors. Including accessibility in design helps prevent serious errors caused by common issues like unlabeled buttons and forms. And I can tell you that the Bitcoin Design Foundation has done a little bit of research in this area over the last couple of years. Christoph has really been heading that one off. I'm hoping to help pick up the torch from him and carry that forward even further. But he's done a lot of testing, and he's created a accessibility hit list on the GitHub for the Bitcoin Design Foundation. And there's a lot of Bitcoin wallets and apps that have critical issues for people with disabilities. So if you're blind and you're using a screen reader, you may not be able to even use that application, right? So that's pretty serious. I have friends that are blind and have disabilities that use things like Coinbase because they have no other option as far as accessibility goes. Coinbase is at least accessible for them, but then they get into shitcoins, right? So we want to avoid that. A third thing here is accessible design is resilient design. If you're building your tool to work across diverse abilities, devices, and environments, it's quite often going to be more robust and reliable in general. So another reason that we should care about accessibility in Bitcoin is Hal Finney had a disability. He was diagnosed with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis in 2009. This is a progressive neuromotor disability, and it's ultimately fatal. And he was diagnosed shortly after receiving the first Bitcoin transaction, but he continued working on Bitcoin despite his diagnosis. And he wrote about his use of assistive technologies in a post called Bitcoin and Me from 2013. And I have that linked here, and it's also in the resources. So I would recommend taking a look at that towards the end. But it's a really good quote about how he's using assistive technology and how he was still coding and trying to advance Bitcoin. So some of the disability categories to design for, we want to think about visual disabilities, right? So we want to make sure that our app is accessible for people who are blind or have low vision. They may have macular degeneration, or just have aging eyes, right? Or they may be colorblind. There was a lot of presentations here I saw this week, and I'm partially colorblind, and a lot of them had charts and graphs that were color-coded, and some of them were really hard for me to determine, like which line goes to what, right? So just thinking about those things in advance would be very helpful, especially when we're talking about critical applications like Bitcoin, right? If you're trying to recover a wallet and you have something color-coded, you don't want to be, messing with that and trying to guess at what path you need to go down, right? Other disability categories are cognitive and neuro disabilities, so things like ADHD, dyslexia, autism. We're all autistic Bitcoiners here, right? And then memory issues. So memory issues are really interesting. I've actually done some usability testing with people that have cognitive memory issues, and one person in particular I was testing with actually had a traumatic brain injury from a motorcycle accident. He's a very intelligent guy, very smart, very good worker, but every 5 seconds his memory would essentially reset. So if you put him into a UI and asked him to perform a task, if that task took more than 5 seconds and it wasn't clearly labeled like where he was in the process of that task, 5 seconds later he'd have to restart and figure out where he was all over again. So those things do happen, and people are very smart and intelligent otherwise, but they may just have a cognitive disability from a traumatic brain injury and may not be able to retain that short-term memory as easily as others. Other things are auditory disabilities, so like deafness and hard of hearing. There's temporary environmental disabilities, so things like a broken arm, a noisy cafe, bright sunlight. So these are all things that impact our experience with technology. And I like to say that if we live long enough, all of us are going to experience some form of disability at some point. And the Bitcoin Design Foundation also has on the front page of their accessibility section talking about the number of people with disabilities in the world, and somewhere around 15%, which is a pretty good number. So at some point, we probably will all have some form of disability. Then there's motor disabilities. This is very much what Hal Finney had. So that leads to limited mobility, tremors, paralysis. There's other things like MS, right? Multiple sclerosis. They cause similar issues. Actually, I was talking to one of the hackathon participants for Bitcoin 2025, And they mentioned that they have MS and that they had an issue with faucets for for Signet, and they all had CAPTCHAs on these faucets, right? And the CAPTCHAs required clicking through or solving a puzzle, and they weren't the accessible CAPTCHAs. So he created his own Signet faucet with an accessible CAPTCHA just for himself, right? So this can be very helpful for people who are developing technologies for Bitcoin and contributing to the ecosystem, right? So some other assistive technologies you should know. So the screen readers, things like VoiceOver, NVDA, and TalkBack. VoiceOver is on iOS. NVDA stands for Non-Visual Desktop Access. That's on Windows. It's a free open source screen reader, so you can download it and start using it today and start testing applications and seeing what works and what doesn't. And then TalkBack, of course, is on Android, which comes with most Android phones. Then there's screen magnifiers. Those do exactly what it sounds like, just magnifies the screen to different levels. Generally, you want to test at like 200% and 400% for the most common disability types that use screen readers or screen magnifiers. Then we have switch controls and alternative input devices. Switch controls are basically just like another option than a keyboard. So and there might be like a foot switch, for example, if you can't use your hands. Or you might have just a switch where you can tap if you don't have very fine dexterity and you can't really press the right key on the keyboard. It might be a big button, and you just press on it to activate things, right? So ensuring that your application is accessible to keyboard users is going to also ensure that it's accessible to alternative input devices. And then there's things like Braille displays, which is the picture on the bottom right, where there's basically these little dots that pop up on a pad, and you run your fingers across it, and it reads out the information that's being presented on the screen. So if you're a Braille user and use a refreshable Braille display, you want to make sure that the applications that you're using are also compatible with that, right? So it just means that the alternate input devices work with the application. Then we have things like voice control. There's Siri and dictation software. Those are going to help you navigate an app without using your hands at all or without using any kind of motor input. So you can use your voice for everything. But if you have labels that are not exactly what they look like in the UI, then the user might say, click the go button or click the send button, and maybe it says something else in the background in the programmatic name for that button, and then the user won't be able to activate it, right? Then there's captions and transcripts, which I think are pretty obvious who that helps, but all these things can help average users to some degree or another as well. So the main principles you want to think about when designing accessible applications are the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.2. They have 4 essential principles for accessible Bitcoin design, or accessible design in general. That's that they're perceivable. So that just means information user interface components are presentable to users in ways they can perceive. So providing text alternatives, captions, adaptable formats. That it's operable, that the UI components must be operable by all users. You have keyboard navigation, seizure-safe design. So if you have a design with a lot of flashing and stuff, you want to make sure that you keep it under a certain threshold so that it doesn't trigger a seizure in somebody. And then clear wayfinding, knowing where you're at in a particular UI and what a step of a process, right? Then the other principle is understandable. Information and operation of the user interface must be understandable. So that's just being readable, predictable, and just helpful in avoiding mistakes, right? So that's very critical in Bitcoin applications. And then we want to make sure that our applications are robust. Content must work reliably with current and future user agents and assistive technologies using standards, compliant code. So clean, compliant code that is based on a reference standard, right? So we have some accessibility examples in Bitcoin apps on the Bitcoin Design Foundation website. If you go into the accessibility section, there's a screenshot that I have up here on screen right now that shows a mock-up of a payment request in a wallet, a Lightning payment request. And on the left side of the screen, we see the application as you would experience it as a sighted user. On the right side of the screen is how you would experience it as a blind user, with only the labels of the buttons being announced. And the issue that we're finding in a lot of Bitcoin wallets is that developers just forget to label the buttons correctly, right? So as a blind user, if I'm going through this, I hear unlabeled button, unlabeled button, unlabeled button, unlabeled button. And then it just completely removes my confidence in the application, right? I don't want to store my money there. So some things to think about here. You want to ensure sufficient contrast for text. Generally, that's a 4.5 to 1 contrast ratio for regular size text. And then meaningful UI elements, so like buttons and controls or icons that indicate something that's very commonplace. Those you want to have a 3 to 1 contrast ratio on. You also want to ensure you have larger touch targets. So the button doesn't necessarily have to be bigger, but you want to make sure that the tappable area around the button is big enough to allow for some affordance if somebody has a tremor or a disability and they can't, tap a specific area. Or maybe you're just using it one-handed, right, while you're riding a bike or something. Those things provide affordances for everybody. So in that case, you want to use 24 by 24 px as the minimum, and then the recommended standard, I think, is 44 by 44 px. And then descriptor labels for controls and alerts. You want to make sure that that's available for screen reader users, and then status messages as well, all right? So if you have an error that pops up on screen, you need to make sure that that's being announced to a screen reader user. And all these things are possible today in modern operating systems through the accessibility APIs, right? So Apple has it, Android has it, Windows, Linux. All modern operating systems have some sort of accessibility API that you can tap into there. And then text alternatives for QR codes and images. If you don't know the QR codes on the screen and you're a blind user, you might not know whether you're on the screen to accept the payment request and whether or not to present your phone to somebody to get paid, right? So just providing a short text alternative, letting the user know that there is a QR code on the screen is very helpful. And then screen reader friendly recovery flows with clear instructions are also going to be very helpful for obvious reasons of, entering one word in your mnemonic seed phrase in the incorrect order is going to lose all your funds, right? So I have this table for designing for edge cases, and it talks about the accessibility features, who it helps first, and how it can help everyone. I don't think I'll go through all this right now because we're a little short on time. But all this information is also in the resources guide that I'm going to be linking here at the end. But essentially it just talks about how like captions and transcripts help deaf or hard of hearing users first, but it also helps folks that are in quiet or noisy environments, and it helps with faster information parsing. It helps with AI too, right? Like if you wanted to plug a transcript into AI and get a good summary, it's very helpful. So these things don't just help people with disabilities, they help everyone. And I can tell you, in 15 years of doing this type of work, there's so many issues I've uncovered that wouldn't have been uncovered unless we were looking at these edge cases, right? So security through accessibility. We want to have fewer irreversible errors, so using clear language. There's this thing called the Flesch-Kincaid reading ease scale that you can use just to ensure that the language that you're using for your application is not over the top, right? General rule of thumb there is you want to use a 7th grade reading level or lower. If you have a lot of technical information, you're designing for developers, there's some affordances for that too. You can remove those technical terms out of there to make sure the grade scale is still low, but when you put the technical terms back in, it makes it a little more complex. It's not a foolproof thing, but it does certainly help with a good rule of thumb. Providing accessible backups, we want to look at all the different multimodal inputs and outputs that we can possibly provide this information in, so that if I'm a user with a disability, at least one of those modal outputs is something that I can process and understand, right? So, if you have a QR code, making sure that you have the alt text for the QR code. If it's a mnemonic seed key, making sure there's a way to announce that to the user via the screen reader or a braille display. Using multi-sig is going to be very helpful as well for securing funds, and providing NFC options for that may be good for better for some folks, as well as maybe even biometric options. So just thinking about all those different use cases and trying to provide enough options to where if somebody with any one of those use cases comes into your app, they can still use it. Then human-proof defaults. We want to make sure that we have less address reuse, right? We want to enforce security and privacy through a good design, right? We don't want to have to tell the user over and over, what they need to do to ensure that they're not giving up metadata or giving up their privacy. We want it just to be default. And then we want to test with edge users, as I mentioned multiple times already, just to find critical flaws before it's too late. So I have this mobile accessibility testing checklist as well. You can enable VoiceOver or iOS on TalkBack or Android. You enable VoiceOver on iOS and TalkBack on Android. And essentially what you want to do is just want to test the navigation, the labeling, and the reading order of the screen reader. Another check that's a really good one to do is just navigating without touch gestures. So using keyboard shortcuts. So you might want to plug in a Bluetooth keyboard or you plug in a keyboard directly and use the keyboard to try to navigate the application. If you can't get to everything with the keyboard, then there's probably an issue there. Then same thing with voice commands or other non-touch interactions. You want to check the color contrast. There's a bunch of WCAG 2.2, which is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, contrast checkers, which I provided resources to in the resources document. But those allow you to check, the foreground versus the background contrast and make sure that you have a sufficient contrast for most users. You want to zoom the display to 200% and to 400% respectively and make sure that nothing breaks in the layout, that everything is still visible, and that everything reflows properly at the highest settings. You want to turn on grayscale or colorblind modes. Those are available in most modern operating systems today, so it's a really easy thing to check. Enable large text settings. This is another thing we want to check, particularly with VoiceOver, with Apple and iOS, because they have this thing called dynamic type, and quite often what application developers will do is they'll create a native application with a native wrapper, and then they'll provide like a web view, right, into to like a progressive web app. And if you're not assigning the CSS properties correctly to have a fallback for the system font, then it's not going to implement dynamic type. And so when you zoom in, or when you bring the scale of the letters up to the highest setting, it just doesn't do anything, right? So then you have no text zoom essentially. Then using voice-only controls, as I mentioned a couple times, voice control on iOS, that's actually the name of it, and voice access on Android is another application that you can use just to speak to the phone and tell it what to do, and tell it what buttons to click and things like that. Okay, so it's really easy to set up VoiceOver on iOS. You simply go to Settings, Accessibility, and VoiceOver. There's another optional setting there called Live Recognition. You don't want to turn that on when you're testing because it can give you a false sense of security, right? Live Recognition will help with AI to identify things that have not been labeled properly. But if you're testing, you want to know that it's not labeled properly to begin with, right? Because the live recognition may not be correct every time. And then how to set up TalkBack on Android. So settings, accessibility, TalkBack, so pretty simple. But if you're setting it up there, I would recommend using the TalkBack shortcut as well, because that allows you to have a little button on the side that you can push to turn it on and turn it off, so you don't get stuck using the screen reader and then having your phone lock and then not knowing how to turn it off, which if that happens to you, just let me know and I'll come around and help you. Now here's the main thing, so the tools and resources. So I'd recommend taking a picture of this QR code here, and I'll provide the link as well to anyone that needs it after this. But it's essentially my GitHub IO, so it's jason-me.github.io/bitcoin-universal-design. And this is really a guide that I want to continue to develop and continue to get feedback on. So if you have any ideas for suggestions or improvements, or if you see a resource that makes sense or a resource that doesn't make sense, just let me know and we'll add it or remove it or update the guide as needed. But yeah, we're going to be using this for the Designathon, this hackathon, and Bitcoin 2025 hackathon as well. So some final thoughts here. Keep it simple. A couple of quick slogans we can remember. Solve for one, extend to many. Another one is designing for the edges strengthens the core. So if we're thinking about these edge use cases in advance and we're designing for these most constrained use cases, we're probably going to surface a lot of issues that wouldn't have been uncovered otherwise, that often can hinder average users. So I have a little information about where to find me. So you can find myself and my colleague John J. Herzog on Discord. I'm Jason Bits on Discord, and then jason.me on GitHub. And then I have a X and Nostr profile called Decentralize with A11Y. And that's just really to get the conversation started about accessibility in free open source software in general, right? Because I think it's a huge issue across a lot of free open source software. And I did a talk about this at a disability conference in California not too long ago, where I was actually talking about how Bitcoin can help to incentivize designers and developers to contribute to open source projects and receive Bitcoin bounties. And so we did some use cases and stuff on that. I have that linked in the notes as well. But there's also a video here at the end, and I think we're probably running out of time. So, okay. So if you guys want to stay around, we have a video you can watch. I'm not sure if Sahil's here, if he's going to come up next. If he pops in, then we can turn the video off, I guess. But this video is a screen reader demo that shows my colleague John Herzog walking through the Sparrow Wallet app. And yeah, I'll just go ahead and leave it at that. And it's a little bit long, though. It's like 15 minutes or so. Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is John Herzog, and I'm going to be doing a demonstration of how the NVDA screen reader on Windows works with a Bitcoin wallet called Sparrow. Now, this demo is great because we have some areas where the screen reader does exactly what you would expect it to do and reads well, and other areas where it definitely could use improvement. I hope this is helpful for you as you consider accessibility in your Bitcoin projects throughout this developer conference. So without further ado, I am just running a standard Windows 11 computer here. I'm on my desktop, and I'm going to launch Sparrow for the first time here. So here we go.
Sparrow, File Explorer. Sparrow.
Can everybody hear that okay?
Standalone version.
Yeah.
So I'm going to launch Sparrow here by hitting enter.
Dialog. Welcome to Sparrow. Introduction. Sparrow is a Bitcoin wallet with a focus on security and usability. Sparrow can operate in both an online and offline mode. In the online mode, it connects to a server to display transaction history. In the offline mode, it is useful as a transaction editor and as an air-gapped multi-sig coordinator. The status bar at the bottom displays the connection status, as demonstrated below. Offline. Next button.
You can tell in this dialogue, the screen reader spoke all of the welcome material. This is good. This is what we want, because this is an introduction screen that tells the user about the program. Now, it may not always be good for a screen reader to speak every possible thing on screen, but we'll get more into that later. I'm going to hit the next button here. Now, this is the first of our areas that could be improved. When I hit the enter button, I didn't hear anything from the screen reader. At a minimum, we want to hear that something has happened. So we want to either hear the screen title, or preferably in this case, we'd want to hear more instructions that appear about connecting to a server. Now, since the screen reader didn't read anything, I have to use navigation commands for our NVDA. These are intermediate to advanced commands, and so ideally, when a user is first getting acclimated to a new program like this, we don't want them also to have to try and use advanced navigation commands for their screen reader to try and figure out what's relevant to them on the screen. Because I'm in laptop mode, I'm going to use the caps lock, the shift, and the right arrow key to move around. If you're on a desktop, you might have to use your number pad to move between different items on the screen with the NVDA focus. But let's see what it says here.
Welcome to Sparrow. Graphic. Connecting to a public server. If you are beginning your journey in self-custody, or just storing a small amount, the easiest way to connect Sparrow to the Bitcoin blockchain is via one of the pre-configured public Electrum servers. However, although Sparrow only connects to servers that have a record of respecting privacy, it is still not ideal as you are sharing your transaction history and balance with them. A yellow toggle means you are connected to a public server. Connected to a public server. Demonstration only.
And it seems to read everything, so I'm going to hit the next button. And for the purposes of this recording, I'm going to hit the offline mode toggle. So I'm going to click next. Now, this is interesting because when I hit the tab key the first time, I heard nothing. Hit the tab again, I heard nothing.
Back button.
Back button.
Next button.
You don't want to have unlabeled elements on screen or times when the screen reader says nothing, because it gives me the impression as a blind user that nothing is happening. All right, I've clicked next, but I don't know that anything has actually happened because the screen reader hasn't said anything. At a minimum, it should speak the name of the control that has received focus. I know from previous demos of this software that this is the screen where I can choose online or offline mode.
Back button. Next button.
Oh no, I didn't have the next button even focused.
Back button.
Hold on.
Next button.
There we go.
Later or offline mode button.
I'm going to choose later or offline mode. I'm going to hit enter there.
Sparrow. File. Sparrow window. New wallet link.
Okay, and now I'm going to go into the import wallet option because I want to give a little bit of a demo. I'm also going to slow the speech down just a touch here.
Rate 24. Rate 19.
There we go. I'm going to go into the import wallet window here.
Open wallet link. Import wallet link.
Going to hit enter there.
Dialog. Dialog mnemonic words. BIP39. Seed import details. BSMS wallet import details. Blue wallet vault multisig wallet import details. Cold card wallet import details. Cold card multisig wallet import details. Electrum wallet import details.
Okay, I'm going to silence the screen reader with the control key. But in this case, you'll notice that it starts to read every single available option on screen. This is not what we want because although the options are available, I'm not focused on any of them, and it doesn't help me to hear every single thing that's available. What we want to hear in this case is any directions if available. So we don't want to hear every single option because we can use the tab and the shift tab keys to move between the options, and ideally each one of those would be labeled. So in this case, we would just want to hear the directions about how to import a wallet if those exist on the screen. If not, just speak the control name that we're on and maybe the screen title by default. Okay, so I'm going to hit the tab key and we're going to see how the rest of this screen reads here.
Cancel button.
Tab.
Grouping collapsed. Details. Link. Use 24 words split button collapsed. Grouping collapsed. Details. Link. Scan. Toggle button not pressed. Import file. Toggle button not pressed. Grouping collapsed.
I want you all to do me a favor. I want you all to close your eyes and just listen. And I'm going to tell you each time that I hit the tab key. So close your eyes. I'm going to hit tab now.
Details. Link.
And tab.
Scan. Toggle button not pressed.
Tab.
Import file. Toggle button not pressed.
Tab.
Grouping collapsed.
Tab.
Details. Link.
Tab.
Scan. Toggle button not pressed.
Tab.
Import file. Toggle button not pressed.
Tab.
Grouping collapsed.
You might have noticed that we seem to be hearing the same three things over and over again. Scan, details, and import file. You know, as a blind user, you might think that we're in a keyboard trap right now, where essentially we're just cycling between three items, scan, details, and import, and we're not really moving forward through the screen. What you might have noticed visually, however, if you open your eyes, you might notice that we're actually moving through the different wallet types that are available to us to import. This is an example where simply ensuring that individual controls have labels may not be sufficient enough to provide the needed context for a user of where they are in the screen. There are two ways to fix this. Ideally, what you would want to do is you would want to give the group a label. So for example, Electrum, instead of just hearing the screen reader say group collapsed, it would say Electrum wallet as an example. And then when you hit the tab key, it says scan, import, and details. And then when you get to the next wallet, MetaMask, for example, it would say MetaMask wallet for the group name. And then all the labels within that group would have, or all the elements would have the labels, you know, details, scan, import file. The other way to fix it would be a little clunkier, but you could add the wallet name to each one of the controls. So for example, Electrum import file, or scan Electrum, or Electrum details. Let's go, I'm gonna go back, and I'm gonna go back to the button that says use 24 word seed phrase, because I wanna show you another example of an area that could use improvement here. I'm gonna shift tab.
Deep group, deep group, detail. Use 24 words split button collapsed.
There we go, hit enter.
Edit blank.
Okay, now the screen reader says edit blank. If I hit tab.
Edit blank.
Tab again.
Edit blank.
Tab again.
Edit blank.
Now, if I type in words to these fields, the screen reader will sort of read what I've written, and I'll show you that right now. So I'm going to write dial in this first field, D-I-A-L, and if I hit tab here,
L.
it says nothing.
Dial, edit blank.
So I hit tab again, and I'm going to type in standard. And I'm going to hit tab again.
Standard.
And if I hit shift tab.
Edit selected standard.
Shift tab.
Edit blank.
Shift tab.
Edit selected dial.
You'll notice that the screen reader is speaking the words in the fields, but you'll also notice that there's a critical piece of information missing. It's not telling me the word numbers. So it's not telling me right now that I'm on word 3 or word 4 or word 5. So as a result, I can hear the word I just typed, but I can't really tell which number out of 26 or 24 that I'm on. Keep in mind that if I enter one word wrong while importing my wallet, I could lose all my cash available. I could lose all my funds. This is not a very good way to inspire trust or user confidence in the software. I mean, as a blind user, I need to trust that what I'm hearing is accurate and that I'm hearing the full amount of the information. And unfortunately, this is not very confidence inspiring. I want to show you something else that the screen reader is doing that's inappropriate here. I'm going to tab over to another field.
Edit blank.
And I'm going to type in post to this field, P-O-S-T. And if I just hit tab and wait a while, you'll see what happens. Rather than jumping to the next field right away, you'll see what the screen reader is actually doing here.
Post.
So I hit tab, just waiting.
Dialog 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. Use passphrase. Advanced feature. A passphrase provides optional added security, but it is not stored, so it must be remembered. Invalid checksum mnemonic words. BIP 39. Enter word.
So the screen reader should have read those instructions when I first entered this dialog. What it's doing instead, though, is when I hit tab after entering a word, it's waiting for a while and then it's reading all of the dialogue. You can tell also that it's reading the numbers 1 through 24, but it's reading them separate from the fields with which they are associated. Ideally, what we'd want to do here is when a user clicks on the option to use the 24 word seed phrase, those instructions that we just heard about a seed phrase is not stored locally, you'll have to back it up, etc., those would be read, and then a user would hear the name of the control that they're on, which is word 1. So this has been a brief overview and demonstration of some of the...
I'm going to go ahead and stop it there since Sahil's here and we're a little short on time. But that's essentially a couple of issues that we identified in Sparrow Wallet. And an important thing to note here is that I reached out to Craig Raw on GitHub at like 1 a.m. on Wednesday night, and I wrote up an issue and sent it to him regarding these issues. And by the time I woke up in the morning to come here, he had already fixed a bunch of the issues and thanks us for the issues. So, you know, these are things that we can fix. We can fix them pretty easily across most Bitcoin applications. And I highly recommend that we just take the moment to think about it as we're developing new applications. Let's see here. I think I lost my slides here, so I was going to just show that QR code one more time, if possible. Let's see, where's my mouse? Sorry.
Looks like you have to click down.
Click down. You see the mouse anywhere? Okay. Down? Okay.
Okay, you're in the zone. Now you have to pick the correct side. If you click any of
Is this one?
I don't see a QR code.
No. Okay, sorry, this way.
Can you do left, right arrows?
Yeah, I can do that now, yeah. There we go, cool. Okay, so here's the QR code, here's the tools and resources, a guide that I set up. There's actually some good examples of an accessible combo box that I implemented there, as well as an accessible menu navigation structure. So if you're looking for a good reference implementation, I took those directly from the W3C and modified the code from just the docs to get it to work properly. So it was a little bit of a pain in the butt, but it works and it displays properly and reads out correctly to screen reader users now. So all of this information is available in the guide. We also have the video in the guide, so if you want to watch the rest of the video, there's another little short section on how to test with a mobile device. Yeah, so any questions? Yes? Unfortunately, not at this point. Yeah. I would tell you, actually, Zeus Wallet has done a lot of good to get closer in that regard. And they were actually one of the first people to accept the challenge to do lightning bounties for accessibility, right? So the Bitcoin Design Foundation came up with that a couple years ago. And yeah, they were the first ones to put it out there on Twitter, and they got a lot of things fixed. So they're actually pretty good, yeah. The UI, and that was another example too that I showed in one of the previous slides with the phone screen. Yeah, so they have a really good design from a color contrast perspective as well here. So, and I think all this stuff should be labeled properly now, but I have to double check it. There's a lot of apps out there that I haven't had a chance to check. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
See the string, but if you can't see the string, is it the case that you just have to listen to the full, however many characters and then try
Correct.
and remember them, or is there a proposal?
Yeah,
for how
and
to do
you could shorten it, to show the first and the last characters, for example. That might be a little bit better, and that's a very important point too, because as a screen reader user, you have to put a lot of things into your memory, right? You have to. It's very time sensitive and memory sensitive, right? If you're trying to understand how to navigate a screen or a page, you really need to listen to the entire page and know everything that's on the screen to get the same picture that somebody who's sighted would be able to see just by looking at it very quickly, right? So some things you can do there is provide semantic markup so that you have the structure of the page readily available in a quick manner to get to. So you can use semantic headings, lists, things like that. But yeah, then providing maybe just the first couple characters and the last couple characters of the QR code. With the option to expand the whole thing if they want to validate the entire transaction string, which they should, right? That would go a long ways to allowing them to remember at least the first and the last, and then match it against what else they have.
And in general, is it the case that when an industry matures, there'll be a specialization into like making a wallet specifically designed for people with a particular accessibility issue, or is it normally the case that people with an accessibility issue they also want to use the best wallets available.
That's it, yeah. People with disabilities, they want to use the same thing everyone else is using. They want to use Sparrow Wallet. They want to use Zeus Wallet. They want to use all the good stuff, right? So we want to make that stuff accessible. And I think it's easy to do. I mean, it's easy for me to say that it's easy to do because I've been doing this for a long time. But just diving into a couple projects in the last couple of months, I've made some improvements very quickly and very easily that were pretty dramatic. Lots of low-hanging fruit out there that we can, if not get it to like the highest level, we can get it like pretty close in a very short amount of time, just by adding appropriate labels and stuff like that. So, cool. Any other questions? All right, I appreciate your time today. So next up is Sahil. He's going to do a talk about how to design.
being here. So I'm going to be talking about product design, what it is. I'll keep it really short. I'm trying to keep it very actionable. I don't want to get too high level here. So I thought this was a little cheeky name, product design for fun and hackathon profit. So hopefully it's useful for anyone watching this for hackathon purposes, but even just beyond that. Okay, who the heck am I? I'm a designer, currently at Foundry, designer at Foundry. It's like we're the biggest mining pool out there. Before that, I've worked for clients like Fold and Fedi and a bunch of other companies. I've probably worked with a lot of you doing the hackathon. And before that, I was at Unchained, again, just doing design stuff. And we have a monthly design meetup here called Awesome Bitcoin Design Club. So if you're in town next week, yeah, come through. Cool. So what even is design in the first place? Some people think it's like colors and fonts and visual things. That's part of it. But it's also just how things work, right? It's problem solving at the end of the day. You're trying to anticipate what people need. You're trying to reduce the amount of effort people take to do things. And there's a little bit of delight too, right? You want things to just, it's kind of cliche, but you want things to just work and for people to be like, that was amazing. How did he think of that before I even thought of it, right? So that's kind of what I think about design. And it sounds kind of heady. So you're probably like, okay, cool story. I get it. Colors and fonts and that kind of thing. So I was thinking about what do I want to actually talk about for this workshop. And I could do like design principles and things like that. But honestly, you could probably look it up yourself and it probably won't be that relevant for this hackathon. So I was like, okay, what can I do here? And so I came up with this plan of like, I basically went back in my head and walked through, when I'm working on a project, what does my workflow look like roughly? And how could I distill that down to be very useful for us here? So that's kind of the plan. And by the way, you don't need to really take notes or anything. I made this kind of like checklist at the end, so you can just take a screenshot of the QR and open it up later. So that's the plan. So yeah, I think the first phase or step that I think about is like identifying some of the problems, right? So who are we building for anyway? So even a hackathon project, you probably want to identify like who's your audience. So for example, Jason pulled up Sparrow. Sparrow is one type of product with a very specific audience, right? BitKey is a whole different audience. I mean, it's a completely different type of user. So just being clear about that up front, like Rodolfo building Cold Card, he's thinking of different things and making different decisions compared to the folks at BitKey, right? Which is supposed to be a lot more accessible to the general person, I guess. So I think that's the first step I usually do is think about that, like be very clear about that. I think this one's a lot more obvious probably. I don't need to spend too much time on this, but just what do you want to do as a team? Like what's the project goals? And even outside of hackathons, right? You're at a company, you're at Mempool or whatever. What's the goal of this project from a business point of view or a project point of view? So I think I think the who are you building for, in my opinion, is like harder to think about sometimes. But once you've kind of done that, I think it's worth spending a little bit of time defining or like mapping out the solution space. And so here's what I mean by that. Everyone talks about this, like designers and user experience people mapping a user flow, but why do you even want to do that? And I guess maybe let's start with like an example, right? This is a very, very stupid example. Like user flow of a Bitcoin wallet. There's no branching here. It's very simple. I'm pretty sure I just put this into ChatGPT and it was like, give me a rough wireframe. But the reason why you'd want to do this, and especially make it branching, right? So let's say you're Sparrow, or your project is something like I don't know, Bitcoin wallet or whatever. It helps to map out the different entry and exit points and the different branches, right? So like when I log in, here's one potential flow a user could go down. Here's another potential flow the user could go down. And once you do that and you start to get that going, first of all, it helps you find points that like, potential pain points, and you can like, you'll have to hypothesize this, right? You'll be like, okay, the onboarding could be a little bit rough, or maybe when after I send a transaction, the waiting period, like maybe that'll be tough. So you can hypothesize different points of like struggle points and maybe points that you may want to add a little bit of delight, right? I mean, this is cliche again, but just for an example, you send the transaction. Do you want like a little cutesy little thing? Maybe, maybe not. Or another example that's maybe more unique is like when you're recovering a wallet. That's like a really critical point where in that user flow, you'll be like, this is a really high stress scenario. It happens almost never, but when you do that, it's really high stress. So maybe you can make that a point of delight. So the user flow mapping really helps with that, I think. And also at this point, when you're mapping, when you do the user flow map, you can kind of identify, what I mean by this slide, core versus context, it kind of helps you identify the points that are critical to your business or project versus context, right? So core, I mean things like, if it's a Bitcoin wallet, you have to be able to back up. You have to be able to send and receive. But context could be like, okay, what does the settings page look like? Or what is like the navigation? I mean, you can identify each of those things and potentially spend less time on the context and spend like all your freaking time on core. So, and by the way, yeah, if it's core, you can focus on polishing that for the demo because that's really what is probably going to win over the judges, rather than like, the judges aren't going to be like, oh, would your settings page look really nice, So yeah, that's identification, or sorry, definition. That's kind of, I think it was like defining the problem space. So all of that is what I think about. And now kind of once you've done that, now is I think kind of the fun part, which people probably expect me to talk about. But here's you're actually exploring the details of the problem space. So I call that like exploration kind of. And so this is weird. You'd probably expect me to talk about Figma and jumping in and like drawing screens. I haven't been in Figma in like a month. This is really weird to admit, but I've just been using all these like vibe coding tools, to be honest. I'm like jumping right into that. So I'm just start prototyping, especially for hackathon purposes. And most of us here probably listening are not designers who are very proficient in Figma. Just open up V0 and just like tell it to do things. And I'll talk through some like specific examples that have been useful for me. But yeah, pull up V0, Bolt, Replit. I think Figma just announced one too, but I haven't tried that yet. so yeah, obviously starting with a prompt and messing with there. But what I've been doing a lot is, and this is not super unique, but I think it was mind-blowing to me, to my workflow, is like having something like V0 open on one side, and then something like GPT or Grok on the other side. And I basically have a team of two, and Grok is like my PM assistant, and then V0 is like my engineer, and I'm literally talking to them. And I can even show you, I use a voice transcription tool called Super Whisper, and I'm literally just talking to them as if they're my teammates. And it's honestly been mind-blowing. So like sometimes I'll literally go to Grok or GPT and be like, here's the problem I'm solving. So remember, we did all the identification, definition. I will just like write all that down, or I'll voice it. I'll talk to it, and I'll say, hey Grok, here's all the identification and definition of the problem I've done. Give me 5 different divergent creative solutions to this problem, And again, like most of these problems aren't like things you have to reinvent the wheel for. So most of the time, GPT or Grok comes up with like really good solutions, honestly. And then you can riff with it just like it's a person. It's like literally your PM, a PM assistant, or like a junior PM, and be like, oh, these 3 kind of suck. This one is really cool. Can we try this and do some more stuff built on that? And then you can plug that into, and then you can be like, hey, give me a prompt for V0, and then just plug that PRD or something into V0 and have a really solid starting point. And I do want to keep space for Q&A at the end so we can get into the weeds on this stuff, to keep it, again, very practical. One more, I think, practical pro tip, again, just as someone who's been using this for the last month. A lot of the great parts about Figma versus jumping into like writing code right away is being able to explore a bunch of different solutions, right? Like you generally don't want to just go to the first thing that comes to mind, because you want to be like, it's the cliched like double diamond process in design. So you want to start divergent and exploring a bunch of ideas, and then start to converge on one. So Figma makes that really easy, right? Because it's just freaking screens and you can just move things around. It's a little bit harder in these tools. So what I found is, I basically, if you see here on the bottom, I basically told V0 to add like a drop-down switcher and give me a bunch of different variants, so that when I can basically say, hey, V0, make these changes only for variant 1. And then I can go to different customers and be like, or in your case, like hackathon hallway test participants, and be like, go to that switcher that V0 made and be like, okay, here's variant 1, test it out. Go to variant 2, test it out. Because the alternative would be forking it in V0, and it's just kind of annoying. So anyway, just a very practical tip. I'm kind of nerding out on that. Feel free to ask me about it later. And then always be testing, right? So now you have your prototypes in Bolt or V0 or wherever, just like hallway usability testing, right? Again, I'm thinking about like practical hackathon tips. There's so many people here. Just take your prototype and go and just ask people to click around. All these tools give you a link where you can just like have people click around and that kind of thing. I think there was one other thing I wanted to mention that, yeah, I think that's it for the exploration phase. So I think with all of that, you'll basically get a good enough kind of starting point for whatever the tool is. And honestly, you can plug into any backend. Like the other day, I used V0 to like make a nicer front end for Ben's Opera Turn bot, and that was mind blowing to me. Like it actually worked. I could broadcast it, and it was really cool. So shout out to Ben. But yeah, once you have that kind of like rough idea and you've tested things out and the UX, quote unquote, is like working, the flow works well. Now I think it's kind of, at least in my opinion, a lot of the fun part is like the polish, right? Because now you're getting ready to present to judges or customers if it's like a real product. What I like to do, and again, this is all kind of new to me, like I'm still figuring this out as I go along, but with these tools, one thing designers do a lot is like mood boards, right? You see cool things like maybe Stripe came out with a new landing page. You're like, okay, I'm going to steal this later, for later. So you collect it. I use a tool called My Mind. It doesn't really matter. You can use whatever. But let's say you're working on a project and you're like, okay, let me go and find a bunch of things that match the vibe of what I want. Just throw all that in a Figma doc. And honestly, you can just plug those screenshots into V0 or something like that and just be like, match this vibe and make the front end kind of look like this. And that works well, I think. It's not always perfect. And I have some other tips if we want to get into that as well. But yeah, I think this is a cool workflow that I'm still kind of working through and discovering myself. And if anyone else has tips, I'd be curious too. And then, okay, yeah, so, and then refinement. Again, it's just like, maybe it feels like I'm talking too much about these AI tools, but it really has completely changed my workflow as a designer, and I know other people too. So refinement, right? So probably most people here don't have a design background or they're not designers. Again, most of this stuff is not mind-blowing, or like the project you're working on is probably not like life-changing from a UX point of view. So just plug the flow into V0 or Grok and be like, you are a principal product design expert. Give me 5 changes based on best practices that I can do, and then throw those back into V0. Like, probably that'll be good enough to start. And then I think my only other comment there is like, eventually you may not even need to do that because you'll build the taste and intuition over time. So this is more just practical tips for today, but in the future, as you start to do that, you'll be like, okay, Grok, I already knew that. I don't have to ask you next time. But it's always good to double check again. So, and then I think that my last slide, and I don't know if I went too fast, but I wanted to keep some time for like practical stuff. But storytelling, I think, is important too, right? Again, it's part of product design in some sense. Like marketing they're all kind of related, product design, marketing. So storytelling is marketing. It's how do you convey, like you can build anything, but if people don't know about it, I think there's a quote I really like. It's like, if you built something but people didn't know about it, did you really build it? Or like, did it even ship if people don't know? So being able to communicate your project really clearly, not putting 15 things on a slide, not like, it's better to have 100 slides with 1 word on it like I'm doing and kind of cycling through than, stuffing a bunch of things and just, showing your project and like making it look really nice. Even if it's a prototype, right? You can hand wave things away, and I'm sure you guys know this more than I do, but if the backend's not working, it's just like, okay, fine, it kind of works. This is what the vision could look like. And yeah, keep it short and sweet, I think. And that's pretty much what I have. I was trying to keep it very practical for us. So this QR and the link tinyurl.com/Bitcoin design opens up, I basically plugged the structure into, I think, Lovable or V0, and I was like, just make a site for me so that people can go through this. I didn't even like spend time on the design, by the way. So hopefully that's useful in terms of like hackathon stuff, just to remember some of these points and like maybe the order of operations roughly. Yeah, I think that's kind of it. I wanted to leave space for Q&A on anything practical. Yeah, what's up?
So there's a bunch of like subscriptions that you mentioned, like a bunch of different products.
Yeah.
And they're all like $20 each. Is there like a minimal list or like a way that you found to reduce some of those costs for people?
Yeah, so the question was like, there's so many different freaking AI tools, and they're all $20 a month, and it adds up a lot. I think honestly, just picking one of each type probably is the way to go. So like V0, Bolt, Lovable, just pick one of them. I'm currently using V0, but I might switch to Bolt. I don't know. They're all evolving so fast. Like Bolt just added 2-way GitHub integration. I think it's the only one that has that. So they're all switching. If you can afford it, just do all of them. It would be really nice. But if you can't, then like Grok you get for free with Twitter Premium. So pay $8 a month and you get Grok. I think T3.chat lets you have access to a bunch of models for $8 a month. So if you can do that, that'd be cool. But oh, lots of questions. Sorry. Do you want to go?
I was going to say, I think Lovable's pretty good as well.
Lovable's great.
Probably better than Bolt.
Nice. Yeah. I got to try that. What's up, Alex?
Curious if you have any like good prompts for like spiffing up UI. Like I typically just say like use a clean aesthetic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any like secret sauce?
That's a good question. I always start with being like, I mean, V0 uses shadcn components anyway, but I just say like, if it's not V0, I'm just like explicitly use shadcn. Just like I don't know what is it. It's like a front-end framework for components, that kind of thing. That'll probably get you a long way. One thing that was cool, I think if I can pull this up, how do I minimize this? I wanted to show this tool, or okay, if I can't show it, if you look up HTML.2 design or HTML2 design, it's a Figma plugin where if you find a site that you really like, should I pull it up? Whatever. If you plug it in there, like let's say you like Stripe for whatever reason, if you plug it into this Figma plugin, it'll basically take the actual code from the site and pull it into your Figma basically. And then you'll have like a working Figma with auto layout and everything. And then, okay, you're like, okay, so what do I do with the Figma? I can't do anything with that. Then you go to Bolt or Lovable or whatever, and usually they'll have like an import from Figma integration. And so you get basically from the site ripped all the way to your prototyping tool. And then you can start messing with things and being like, oh, okay, this button, blah, blah, blah. So it's a great starting point. And honestly, that's a new workflow for me. So I'm still kind of like working through that. I thought about that yesterday, so it's all new. Yeah. I think there was another hand somewhere. Yeah, what's up? Same.dev, that's a good one. Yeah. Yeah, that was controversial on design Twitter because designers love being like annoyed about people copying their stuff. It's like they're all precious about their design. So yeah, but I embrace it. So anything else? Oh, I should probably. Okay, you got the QR. So cool. Thanks.